Hello, I'm Brent McCall.
I'm Adam Rogers.
This is Metro Home Theater Tech Tips, and as usual, we are socially distancing.
Yes, we are.
And in fact, since we're starting about a minute early, we should be hearing our remember to stay 6 feet away and wear your mask announcement any second now.
Any second now. So it should be going off here in just a second. So, but what should be happening right now is you guys, there it is.
Please be sure
So, today is a great
before
episode.
entering the
I'm really
department.
excited about it
While
for
we
two
may
reasons.
consider
One,
the
because it's
difference
things
for
that I want to
one
learn about,
another.
and
Thank you.
two, I get to walk away and sit in the chair and not do anything.
And I got to do that already this season.
Yeah, exactly. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about 110 voltage, so the main power.
R220.
220, yeah, depending on...
R221.
Well, yeah, 220,
Whatever it
221.
takes.
Yep. And we're going to be talking about grounding problems. And we have a very special guest today.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so...
we're very fortunate at Metro Electronics, and I particularly am very fortunate in that I have been working with an electrician who is part of Metro staff for 20 years now. He's worked with me on Vantage, on Crestron, on multiple houses, and he has a very good grasp of what you and I do as integrators.
Yes.
But he's also a master electrician.
Yes, he is.
So he's going to come in, we're going to talk about grounding, talk about outlets, talk about what they need to know in the field, and about how to talk to an electrician and not upset him.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step off to the side here in just a quick second, but before we do that, I'd like to talk about what today's episode is brought to you by.
And what is today's episode brought to you by, Adam?
Today's episode is brought to you by the letter P
Okay, I'm guessing. Why the letter P?
for power. Well,
Ooh.
it should be PR because it's really power
P-O-W-E-R.
yeah, well, it's power relocation. So what we're going to be what today's
PL.
episode is brought to you by. Yeah, see, this is the CS6-6XPWR. This is a 6x6 power relocation kit. This is the thing that you put in those retrofit jobs when you need to get power up behind the TV, and will give you also space inside of it. Thank you as well. To actually put a couple devices inside of it as well. You could put an Apple TV or a Roku or even a DirecTV Genie could fit inside there as well. So that's what today's episode is brought to you by.
The other nice thing about it is, because it is a self-contained enclosed system,
Yep.
you do not actually need to have an electrician, sorry Rob,
Yep.
to do this one, because it is UL listed with a fully terminated cable built in that drops down in the wall.
Yep.
And we have a great video on this party already up on YouTube.
Yes, we do.
Where I do the installation.
Yeah.
So box goes down below, this wire drops in, goes in the back, screws in, and you use a jumper cable between this and an existing outlet
Yep.
to give you the 110. So at no point do you actually tie hard connected
Yep.
into the 110 volts. So it's fully legal for you as a low voltage contractor to do this.
Exactly, and it makes for a really nice, clean setup. You're not just draping power extension cords
Yep.
through the wall, which, technically speaking, is
It's illegal.
Illegal. So just don't do
that.
So we've also got some other news. Before I hand it off real quick, we've also got some other news. I'd like to say that Marantz, I called you about this earlier today.
Yeah, this is very exciting.
Marantz has finally announced, which they did before with their Denon series. Denon Marantz are the same company, of course. But they announced their new models, which are HDMI 2.1 ready.
And fully compliant.
Yeah, which is great because we're going to be seeing eARC support in it, which, you know, again, fingers crossed that it's going to turn into an actual good system as well for eARC. It's going to have, of course, the...
I'm smiling.
I
as
know
far as
you are,
know.
yeah. It's a 4K 120 capability. It's an 8K 60 capability, of course, with the...
Dynamic HDR.
Yep, dynamic HDR. It's going to have to do, of course, the chroma subsampling to bring it down to the 48 gig capabilities. But all this to say, now is the time to get ready to start using those 48 gig cables. So call your rep, call your distributor to find out about pricing and availability on those 48 gig cables.
And which, of course, we have.
Yes, and we'll go ahead and get that figured out from there. So, with all that to say, again, before I step aside, thank you again, everybody who is watching this live. We want to thank you as well for doing that. If you have any questions while we're doing the filming of this, if we're live, go ahead and put it in the chat. If you have any comments or anything after the fact, please put that down in the comment section. Give us a like and a subscribe. We really appreciate that. Lets us know that we're doing things the right way for this. Also, hit that bell notification so you get notified when we go live, and also release other videos as well, so you can keep track of all the different tips and tricks and stuff that we have out there for you.
One nice thing for today, because he's not actually in the frame the whole time,
Yep.
his ability to stay on top of your comments and requesting questions
Yep.
is even better than normal.
Exactly. So I will be in the chat as well if you guys need anything else for that. So definitely ask your
He's
questions
just sitting
in there.
over here socially socially distancing in the corner.
Exactly.
And running the computer.
Exactly. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and switch things over to the other microphones because it sounds really weird right now. And then that way you guys can start talking and you can go ahead and introduce Rob. So, from there, I'm going to click this off.
We're out of the way here so that you can maintain your proper social distancing. While you walk away.
There we go. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to introduce the Metro Home Theater Electrician. Again, I've been working with him for 20 years now. This is Rob Lickfold, Rob the Electrician, according to the ad.
Hello, everybody.
This is Rob, and welcome aboard, Rob, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time out of your COVID preparation here at Metro to share some time with us.
That's been extremely important around here.
Yes, we've put in many speakers for the announcements that you guys hear. Every office gets one, even when we're on the phones. So, as I mentioned, Rob and I have been working together for 20 years, and this has been quite the education for me, because Rob doesn't just let me walk away, even though he makes me look damn good when he's out in the field. He's like, okay, you need to know what I'm doing, and conversely, he follows what I do, so if I'm out of town, he can go over and fix stuff as well. So we're going to start with some basics, Rob, because one of the episodes we have coming up is what do you have on your truck? So we're going to talk about some tools that you have with you to get this going. So tell me about what you got here and what you do with them.
Well, everybody needs a multimeter. You always use a multimeter for everything from continuity to your voltage and your amperage also. This meter will do all three.
And by the way, amperage is the biggest issue we run into on low voltage side is the ability to check that current.
And then the basic tools, we've got what we call in the industry a tick stick, and it just lets you know if there's power on a cable. Some of these will go all the way from 5 volts to 1,000 volts.
That's just, you just press the button, hold it down. It's like an inductive wand, except that it notices the 60 cycles.
Exactly.
Just tick, tick, tick.
And then another good thing to have is a plug tester. It will test your polarity on all of your outlets. And this one's kind of unique because it actually has a power source. It'll tell you the voltage on here.
That is a great feature because, as you and I have noticed in the past, you don't always get the voltage you think you've got.
We might be at 104 or 105 volts, and that's not good for our equipment.
So, and by the way, and we've talked about this, Rob was not here, but Adam and I talked about troubleshooting. Rob and I were on a job site one morning, 6 fixtures above a bed were not lighting up. Crestron control, Crestron lighting, and I'm looking, he's checking all the wiring, I'm looking at all my programming, couldn't find a damn thing wrong, and there's 6 bulbs up there, and Rob sticks his finger in one of them.
That was voltage. We happened to have 6 bulbs blown all in one circuit, so.
And we have to assume that nobody had been in the room in 6-8 months and they all just went bad.
So instead of sticking your finger in there, you can use one of these, and it sure saves a lot.
Well, it was entertaining.
Yes, it was. Yeah, you got to see me squirm a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's about time.
Yes.
Now, one of the things we run into a lot here are grounding problems, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, and a lot of you on tech calls have shared these issues with me, and we've talked about it. One of the things we recommend you have in your truck is a long 14 or 12 gauge extension cord, because if there's a problem between the panel, our subwoofer, our projector, and the source side, the AVR, you may have HDMI problems. And it may not be HDMI's fault, it could be 110. So you want to be able to take everything back to the same circuit, the same group of outlets, the same power strip, and Rob's now going to explain to us why that's a problem. So here, if you'll give me a top-down shot, Adam. We've got a circuit breaker panel. Now Rob's done some basic work on this already, putting in a load and some breakers, and we're going to talk about the A and the B and phasing. So I'm going to step out of the screen here so that you can move over.
Okay, typically a panel, and we all know we use 110 volts, 120 volts as you would call it. And in a panel we have 220. Well, they come in on each side, 110, 110 here, and then that'll make a 220 across the buses. The buses are staggered. We call them A phase and B phase. So we have A phase, second row down will be B phase. Then between the two, that's how we get our 220.
So it's not left and right, it's alternating
up and down.
First line, second line, third line, fourth line.
That is correct. And then here we have a panel that's set up, and this would be considered a sub panel because we are separating our grounds, which these are our ground bars, and our neutrals. And
now, before you go further, what is the difference between a ground and a neutral and an AC feed?
okay, on an AC feed, if you've got a black wire on your breaker and a white wire, the source takes the power out and the neutral brings the power back to the source
the
again.
black or load line carries it to the device.
Yes.
The neutral is the return, so you get that alternating current.
That is correct. And then our grounds are separated in this instance. And a first means of disconnect, they will be bonded together. But second means of disconnect, and it just eliminates a lot of the noise, and the ground is much for your protection for any kind of shock.
For water damage or shocking, stuff like that. Now, one of the things Rob has next to it, and this will give you a better view of it, is this outlet. And if you could go over the different wires on that. And by the way, guys, always make sure your outlets are properly wired. It is AC, so if you have the black wire where it says white, your device will work,
Yes.
but you could run into some noise problems.
A lot of noise problems. As you see, most outlets, the brass screw will be your line side of the positive, and your neutral will be more of a silver colored screw. Some of these outlets now have little holes in the back where they say it's a quick stab, where you push your wires in. And I do not recommend using the quick stabs. They are a small device that just clamps on the wire. Over time and overloads, they will start to loosen up, and then you'll have a hot spot. I recommend always putting them underneath the screws and making sure you've got a good tight connection.
And part of the problem with the stabs is because it's just going in, you have a round wire between flat blades, you have very nominal contact with the copper. So over time, you're going to get, as he mentioned, a hot spot, meaning as it starts to wear out, you can get arcing inside of them. We've absolutely seen outlets
Yes.
that have shorted out or arced over or caused noise problems on a bus because of that.
That is correct.
And we fought that in a kitchen recently.
Yes, we did.
I'm going to step back out of the frame here. Don't want to get in trouble with our safety guy. Okay, so staying with the panel a minute.
Yes.
When you're looking at the grounding inside of this,
Yes.
you've got the neutral, which are all bonded together, and then the separate ground. Ultimately, these are tied together going out to the street, or is this separate?
They are tied together at the first means. When they first come into the house, you will find those are tied together.
So, and when coming into the house, you're going to see typically 3 feeds, 2 blacks, and generally an aluminum wrapped, not braided, just an aluminum bare, which is the ground.
That'll be your neutral, actually, coming from the power company. And then we always run a copper wire out for a ground to a ground rod or structural steel, something that'll take the with the house.
And that is the earth ground for the house.
That's the earth ground.
And
correct.
By the way, and again I compliment Rob on this, I was picking up a lot of hum on my system one night, and I don't get hum on my system. And I noticed that when my refrigerator kicked on, my lights dimmed. I also noticed that when I disconnected my coax, because my first thought was coming from the cable company, when I disconnected my coax from my grounding block, my lights got dimmer in the house. My first call was to Rob. Rob, what the hell is going on in my house? He said, shut down everything, get out of your house, call the power company, and don't go back inside till they get there. Because I had lost ground to my home from the street. The only ground the entire house had for everything in it, the 220 for the HVAC, for the 60 amp load for the hot water heater, 80 amp load for the hot water heater at my house.
Against the hot.
All of this was going over a 12 volt cable that was tied to the coax. And that was it, just the coax from my surge protector in my rack to that point, to the connecting block outside, was the only ground for the entire house. So you've got to be careful with these things. And this is not something, other than knowing it, you should not touch this. This is strictly a 110. This is a utility company issue. But we've had it happen at my house and at the Pink House.
Yes, we did.
Because I was there one day when I lost the outlets on a grounded plug, and the old 2-wire ones still worked because they didn't have the separate ground.
Exactly.
So you've got to be careful on those kind of items. Know this, don't touch this. You need to be able to explain to your customer, sir, it's time for us to step back and call somebody higher up the 110 level. Okay, so I'm going to go back to these a second. If you'll pull these out and go a little bit deeper into the A and the B, because I've always thought of it as right side and left side, and it's not. Because it's actually alternating as to, so can you give us, you'd have. So this one and this one are basically the same thing.
That's right.
Even though this one's on this side and this one's, they're on the same side, but they're not on the same.
Right. Exactly right. This one, as you see, will be our first spot for our breaker. On the right and the left, they will be the same as phases, as we would call it, and we would call it A phase. And I deal with a lot of 3-phase, which we would do A, B, and C phase. But these two would give us 120 on either side. If we went to these two, then we get to 220 across.
Okay,
that's how we do the water heaters.
I want to make sure I understand this correctly. If I have a load on A side number 1 and a load on A side number 2, they're still on the same circuit. I mean, they're not on the same circuit, but they're on the same phase.
Exactly. The same line as the 120.
So that having, if I've got a TV and a audio system, if they're both on that same line, ultimately they're sharing the same phase. Is there a lower or higher chance of noise problems then?
It would be a lower chance because you're not going across the two different ones.
Okay, that is important. So don't think about going from 2, 4, 6, 8, because it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8, correct?
Correct.
So when you're looking at it like that, side by side, they can actually be on different phases.
Yes.
So one right underneath the other one is a different phase.
Yes.
So you actually want to go across,
1 and 2,
not up and down.
Yep.
I honestly did not know that.
Yep.
Grounding is very important. One of the issues we come across is when you're looking at an outlet, if this is not secure, and this is definitely not secure, this is very critical, you can pick up a lot of noise on the bus. And that noise will translate into your system. Now, last week we talked about audio and noise floor. This will absolutely affect the background noise in your hi-fi system and will cause video noise as well. It could be mosquitoes, it could be rolling bars, it could be little jaggies at a diagonal. All that is caused by grounding problems. So when you are looking at an outlet, and again, I'm very spoiled because I have Rob, who works with me a lot, the quality of this connection is paramount in your house.
That's correct.
If you are in a home where the electricians came in and did their job very quickly, those connections may be suspect. How do you work with an electrician? What should I, and now again, I'm spoiled because you've been with me for 20 years. I don't have to say crap to you, and I know it's right. But I'm going on to a job site as an integrator. Myself or Adam, we're going out to do a job, meaning an electrical company that probably has no actual experience doing automated lighting, doing distributed audio, doing these things. How do I talk with him? How do I describe to him? In my days, we called it absolute polarity, maintaining, that all the outlets are properly wired.
Right.
Is that still the correct phrase?
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. It is.
Now, you would assume,
always make sure your polarity's right.
You would assume they're doing this, but we also find, particularly with construction costs coming down, you'll have one electrician and several helpers on the job site.
That is correct. Yeah, you just have to make sure that everybody does their job properly. Everybody takes their time and make sure everything's tight. That's the most important thing. Even with a wire nut, if you were to do what we would call a pigtail, if we would have 3 sets of wires here on this, then I would take my wires, twist them all together, and make what I call a pigtail. It would be 1 set of wires.
Can you give us an overhead, please, Adam?
That would be just like that with a pigtail. So we would just take all the wires, wire nut them together, and make sure everything's correct and tight.
Now, the different colors or the gauge sizes on the wire nuts?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Typically, I generally see orange out there unless it's 3 or more, or 12 gauge. In that case, it goes to yellow.
We generally use a yellow on 14 and 12 wires, and even 10 wires we can use
now,
those. And wire nuts are all listed to how many wires you can put underneath the wire nut. It's all
A
listed on the box.
14 gauge is for 15 amp circuit?
That's a 15 amp circuit, and the 12 gauges are 20 amp circuits, and 10 would be a 30 amp circuit.
Do you run into a lot of 10 amp residentially?
Not residentially.
That's a stiff wire.
Not 10 amp, but 30 amp.
Right, yeah. 10 gauge is a stiff wire.
10 gauge is a stiff wire. Generally in houses and stuff like that, you use it for your dryer, your water heater, small ACs, stuff like that.
The one you've got there, is that a 14 or a 12?
This is a 14 gauge
That's a
wire.
14.
And the code now, most of the code, the white wires here and a Romex type of wire is a 14 gauge wire. Then when you go to a 12 gauge wire, there'll be a yellow in color. And the 10 gauge wires are generally orange with an orange jacket on them.
I did not know that either.
Yeah, that's just something they've been done in the last
Just
5-10 years or something.
thank God we have no aluminum wiring anymore.
Nah, they use aluminum for services, but that's
Right,
about
but that's
it.
big
Yeah,
chunks.
Yeah, that's big
with
wire.
torqued down.
Yeah, yeah. No more old days where you had a wire like this. It was aluminum wire because it heats and expands.
Yeah, and you run it for
contracts
shorts and arcing.
Yes.
For guys dealing with arc fault breakers that you cannot remove for code purposes,
Right.
is there a way to make it more reliable, or we just kind of...
Arc faults are funny. When you do arc faults, this is an arc fault breaker right here. This is an arc fault. And
A arc fault?
as you see, the neutrals actually go into the breaker itself, and the breaker has its own neutral that goes to the neutral bar. There's all different things. There's a lot of times people will take these outlets and pack those into a box, and then if the ground gets up here close to the neutral, the arc fault trips and won't reset.
even though it's not heavily arcing, there's enough of a change in the ground potential
Exactly.
to trigger.
That's the whole purpose of arc faults.
Ah, well, and we've certainly seen issues where you can arc across even though there's not physical contact.
Yes, yes. Well, you've seen
Particularly-
you've actually plugged in a device on a 2-wire plug and seen the arc.
Yeah.
On the 2.
Yeah.
It's-
Now, let's talk about this test tool that you have right here.
Yes.
Along with testing the grounding, because this is something as an integrator, you should not assume that the house is done correctly. You should also not assume that the inspector checked everything.
That's right.
This is a tool you should have in your kit. I'm going to move it forward here so everybody can see it. So as Rob said, this one also does voltage, but more importantly, you want to check the lighting. So tell me a little bit about the lighting on this.
Okay, it has, as you can see, it has different patterns, and it'll tell you if its polarity is right, if there's a ground, and it'll light up accordingly to what it does. So if something is wrong, this chart here will give you an idea to determine where to go to fix it. It could be just reverse polarity. The white's on one side of the plug, on the opposite side, then it should be.
If you have a real electrician, that shouldn't be the case. That's more of a DIY happenstance.
Yes.
Now, let's assume that I have a circuit, typical 6, 8 devices on it, outlets, maybe a light switch. If only one of those is backward on that entire circuit, will this indicate the whole circuit has an issue, or do I have to find the specific device?
Because it could be the dead end, it could be the end of the line.
Okay.
And then if they wired both of them, if they had 2 wires in and out going to the next outlet, those down the line could be that way.
Now, and on that note, I'm going to move this because let's talk about seriesing and paralleling 110. Because it's certainly, a lot of time, and as we've done, you just take the wires, you put them all together, all the whites, and wire cap them, all the blacks, wire cap them. When you series, you take the black off of one, go into the white in the other. Is that how you do it, or do you go black to black, white to white?
Black to black, white to
White
white.
to,
We
okay, so
generally
let's
stay
assume
that
we
way.
have, we're going to take four lights. We have 4 can lights. Now, I need to feed all of those, and typically, you got a couple of options. You can take all the pigtails to one point and put them in a junction box, which is paralleling.
Yes.
And it doesn't act like an audio amp. Or you could series them. So if I'm going to series them, I've got my junction box here with my white wire, I got a black wire, and I got a white wire. I'm going to use red for white.
Okay.
How do I series these correctly?
Correctly at each light. At each light, you would have a joint with your wires coming off your light, and then you would take your red wire to the next light, and your red wire to the next light.
Okay, so we're
and
still
these are
paralleling, we're just doing it in line.
in line. That's correct.
Okay, so we're not going to series like we do speakers.
No.
Okay. How are we doing on questions, young man?
No questions yet. However, a couple things to ask about. Some questions that I had, especially when we're dealing with something like a structured wiring panel, or probably not a structured wiring panel, but a centralized lighting system.
Automated lighting system.
When we are running everything to that one central panel, and then of course we have the control wires out somewhere else, what are we looking at for the need of any kind of electrical at those switches at that point?
Okay.
So kind of talk about that.
Adam's question was this: in centralized lighting, whether it's Crestron, Lutron, Control 4, Vantage, you will have a centralized panel that you're bringing all the loads or devices back to. And at least on the main one, you're going to have also a controller. Now, Rob and I have always treated the controller as a separate circuit completely.
Always, yes.
Because all the control running up and down inside the panels is low voltage. And we don't want to take anything, we don't want a heavy load on one of the modules or shorten one of the modules to shut down the primary master.
Yes.
Adam's question was, should you put additional outlets there? Yes, you always should have additional outlets.
Yes.
Because you never know what you're going to have to put nearby for testing purposes. I encourage having, anytime you have a structured panel like that, have a couple of controlled outlets nearby if for no other reason than testing purposes. In the old days of Vantage, they actually used to have a light socket, a light.
Yes, I remember that.
With the long cord, so you could actually take it.
Yep.
And, you know, it probably wasn't the safest thing in the world because you're actually hitting a hot point. But
I remember those old Vantage panels that, like you said, had a light.
Yeah.
And to give you one wire, you go and test each of your loads, or you could test, you know,
if
most
it's on
of your
or
modules.
not, right, yeah. Those days are gone, and I can tell you that probably for good reason. It wasn't the safest idea, but it was
true.
effective.
Yeah, it worked.
But yes, definitely have outlets nearby that are controlled, again, for no other reason than for testing purposes. I would also, it's nice because we've had to add external lighting or low voltage lighting at these places, and if you have this already prepped, you're not having to come in after the fact and add an electrician. One of the things we recently fought on a home was because Rob works for Metra, he was not available to wire a home. So we had to bring in a third-party electrician, and getting him to understand, even between the two of us, we want a controlled load at every outlet.
Exactly. That means
It's a battle.
Means massive amounts of wire for one thing, and
there were two he did not give us, and
I remember.
yeah,
Unfortunately, that didn't work out well.
it did not work out. No,
no.
we lost two permanent loads to have to turn them into controlled loads, which means we lost those outlets
Right.
where they were at. So when you're thinking of these things, I get it. Everybody's trying to save $1.
Yeah.
Pull 3-wire. Just pull 3-wire. What we would do is put a can above the automated lighting can.
That's what we did.
And then if you had a constant, you could break that off, right off the circuit breaker, and then the switched into the automated panel. If you wound up not needing the switch load, you would just ignore it at both ends and treat it like a regular outlet.
Or 2 switch loads.
Right, or 2 switch loads.
Yep.
Although I would recommend never 2 switch loads on an outlet, because guaranteed somebody's going to plug in a vacuum cleaner
Yep.
and it's going to be in a dim,
Yep.
and you're going to burn it up. So in our case, we treat the bottom outlet as constant.
That's the way I do it. Bottom outlet
And the
is
top
constant.
is switched.
Top will be my switch load.
We do the same thing on outlets outside for Christmas lights, for seasonal lights.
Yes.
Coming from the perspective of an electrician, when we're talking about troubleshooting something, what is it that we're looking at, or what should we be looking at different from an electrician standpoint for troubleshooting certain power problems? When it comes to, say, for instance, we talked about grounding a little bit, but what would be another problem that we could run into? Maybe a stray overvoltage or something else, something like that. From an electrician standpoint, what is the best way to troubleshoot that problem? And you'll have to reiterate
Right.
that again.
Adam's question simply was, when we are troubleshooting, attempting to find out, is it a 110 problem or is it something in our world? And we're talking with the electrician and we're giving him some ideas. What information do we legitimately need to give you? And again, we've been down this road.
Yes, yes.
You know, is it a 110 problem? Is it a low voltage problem? Is it a combination of the two? Is it a grounding problem?
And it could be any of those. It's just a matter of troubleshooting it and checking all your voltages.
Let's take, at what point do we step from our world to call the electrician to say, hey, we're having a problem?
Well, when you do go right to the source of the electric outlet that you're using, check that first without your load on there at all. And then that'll generally
By the way,
tell
that
you.
little tool right there that he was showing us earlier,
Yep, this one right here.
that has the voltage reader in it. Now, that does not show current. How do you test for current?
I've got a couple of different devices. I mean, my AC current.
Because one of the
clamp
issues
on meter.
we run into, okay, so but how do you do that at an outlet?
I have a device, and it's made by, I can't remember, Motorola. I think it's Motorola. And it's just a small outlet that you plug into, and it's got a set of a clip on there that you can clip it right on without taking the wires apart, without going to the panel.
Adam will get that information from Rob, and
I'll
we'll
be
get it
glad
posted
to.
up. Because guys, anything you can have out in the field to help you diagnose these problems ahead of time, first off, makes you look like a genius to your customer. Secondly, gives you much better data when you're talking to the electrician, so it speeds up his time. And the vast majority of electricians, I could be wrong, but the vast majority of electricians really don't want to screw with us. They want to go in, do their job, and go home.
Just leave the electric. We'll give you the electric. You take it from there.
Right. So all we really want them to do is make sure it's working and is grounded correctly. Now, we do get a fair amount of calls, and we do talk about 110 and grounding a fair amount in our media, in our conversations. When we are looking at grounding, I'm going to go back to your outlet here.
Okay.
How many of these can you tie together on a single 14 gauge before it's too many?
You could have 5, 6, as long as you have the right wire nut and you twist the wires good and make a
Okay.
good connection.
Okay.
As long as they're twisted tight.
So we're looking at 5 or 6 devices. We are safe with that ground point because it's still only the 110 feet.
Right.
It's not a combination of devices. It's still just that.
That, exactly.
And they're only going to pull, current-wise, what this is going to support anyway before the breaker trips.
That's right.
Our world, you start to look at current draw building up. And 110 AC definitely works different than DC does. Particularly our power supplies, which are typically DC, do not have the range. That's why you're starting to see a lot of outdoor lighting go to AC,
That's right.
because it's all about distance that you can go. Any more questions, young man?
Nope. And actually, I think we're coming up pretty close to our time for today.
Perfect.
So at that point-
If you have any questions, any ideas, thoughts, suggestions, drop them in the YouTube or email us. Our information is right here online. Rob works with us every day. We see him every day, whether he wants to be seen or not. And if you've got a good question that Adam and I don't know, we'll ask Rob, and he's happy to share it with us.
Not a problem.
Guys, thank you for joining us. I'm Brent,
I'm Rob.
and have a great day.